Good evening, everyone, whether you're here with us in the room or joining us online. The Architecture School of Alba would like to welcome you to the continuation of its student-led conference cycle for this academic year. This evening brings an exciting turn to this saga because our guest tonight holds a special place within our lineup. YARA FEGHALI is not a stranger to the ateliers of Alba, as she was once as well one of the many students within their fold. They have formed her as she has formed them, whether it be through her teaching in the experimental studios of Samer Eid, later on publishing together Amalgam in 2013, or her participation in Metamorphose, the 2014 Betadine spectacle. YARA graduated as an architect from this school and went on to broaden her spectrum of learning and teaching in the field. First, at SAC, the Stated Schule Architecture class in Frankfurt. She specializes in architecture and aesthetic practices in a program led by Johan Bethem. She will later on teach there and introduce machine and deep learning in studios such as Leaky Stuff, where critical discussions will be generated as to redefine preset conventions on the notion of aesthetics within architecture. Further down the road, she acquired a master's in design theory and pedagogy under the guidance of David Roux at the Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles. She became part of SciArc's design faculty, alongside its long list of pioneers such as Morphosys' Tom Main, Hernan Diaz Alonso, Dwayne Euler, Liam Young, and many other predecessors that have marked the alternative and speculative school of architecture. YARA culminates within this academic procession and is presently a graduate faculty at UCLA Architecture and Urban Design. Alongside Greg Lynn, they tackle the notions of architecture of fresh air and social distancing, using both agent-based game engine and computational fluid dynamic tools. In parallel, she's the creative director of Folly Feast Lab, a Santa Monica-based studio that she co-founded with Vivian Kmote. Intersecting transmedia and immersive technology, their platform, quote, creates visually led immersive and interactive experiences to address present social and urban themes using AI, game engines, and 3D scanning technology. If YARA today is outside of Lebanon, it is projects like Talk About Beirut, احكي عن Beirut, or Mediterranean Sea Diaries that anchor her attachment to the region, describing the latter's societal questions as one of the four main themes of work at Folly Feast Lab. Belonging, alive, and many other projects manifest by approaching unanswered social paradigms such as queer identification and human-to-machine interrelationship, bridging the social with urban contexts, VR tools, and simulative structures. Her line of work proliferates. Through all interactive, YARA proposes for you tonight a series of visual exposés on the many alternative architectonics and systems that she has developed through academic research and within her studio's framework, ever since graduating from Alba. For her, this discussion is a dive into the exciting world of game engine, photogrammetry, artificial intelligence, simulation, networking, virtual and mixed realities to understand how they can be built as research tools. She will present a palette of work on speculative scenarios and possibilities in regards to virtual and augmented reality with their respective correlation to spatial narratives. Tonight, a window of opportunity to witness the interactive as it dialogues with architecture. Join me in proudly welcoming back this alumna. YARA, the grid is yours.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's such a generous introduction. I'm super excited to be back. It's been almost 10 years, so I'm excited to show where, what could happen in 10 years and where my work has moved to. So please do let me know if the share does not work, if something seems off. Okay, so yeah, here we go. So thank you so much for the introduction, Christopher, and thank you, of course, for Alba, my home school, for having me today. It's a pleasure to share my work and discuss these topics with you. As I promised to Christopher, I'm gonna do basically what he just did, but with this image. So was at Alba. I graduated about 10 years ago, and it feels a bit like coming home right now. I wish I could be in Beirut with all of you. After graduated from 6 years, it used to be when the master and the bachelor were the same program. I studied architecture and graduated as an architect, and I worked in parallel at the offices of Jean-Marc Bonfils and then Samer Eid, and I also taught with Samer, as Christopher just mentioned, after graduation and published with him. And I did my thesis with Nermat Sfer, who was also amazing influence. Then I worked in Beirut, built and took philosophy classes at Ashkal Alwan, and I always felt like I wanted to explore the more experimental side of architecture. So what you're going to see today has nothing to do with building buildings in the physical world, but has a lot to do with building architecture for the digital world. So I wanted to explore more. I went to a program called the Steyerl Architecture class in Frankfurt, Germany. I did a 2-year postgraduate master of art in aesthetic practices. Then I got really into virtual reality and became incredibly interested in technology and emerging new form of digital worlds. Then I got a scholarship to study at the postgrad degree of design theory and pedagogy at SciArc in Los Angeles. After a year there, then I went back to SAC, to Frankfurt. I taught for a year, thesis, and then I finally landed back in Los Angeles at the University of California, so at UCLA in their Department of Architecture and Urban Design. And I taught thesis studio and had the privilege to learn and teach amongst the best in our field. And I'm going to show a lot of that work today. So what I'm going to show today is not only my work, it's also what I taught. So you're going to be able to see some of the student work. So as you mentioned, I co-founded Folly Feast Lab with Vivian El-Kmati. Vivian El-Kmati is also a graduate from Alba, from the architecture and interior, from the interior design, interior architecture program. In 2019, we formed Folly Feast Lab. Most of the work you will see today is from the past 3 years. We run Folly Feast Lab together, and we create visually led, immersive, and interactive experiences to address present social and urban themes. We're based in Santa Monica in Los Angeles, and we work on urban, social, and digital culture theme with an acute focus on creatively working with artificial intelligence, photogrammetry, virtual reality, and networking technology. As you know, this talk is titled All Interactive, Developing Experiences as Design Research. So let's dive into the world of interactivity. Interactivity responds to the question, how much am I doing? Meaning, where are you on the spectrum of being a passive recipient to an active player? So an interaction could be you liking a video on TikTok, it could be you playing Monument Valley or Theme. A passive recipient would be swiping through images, exploring a VR world, being able to see infographics, but not really doing much other than looking. Closer to the active player side of the spectrum, you're playing, making decisions on what you're looking at, and even customizing your space. So you're playing a game, even designing new elements, which could be considered as a very active player. And another word that I want to get into before we start, other than interaction, is immersion, which could be answering the question, how deep do I want to go? And this spectrum passes from the physical realm to the virtual one. Immersion could be you transported by a novel, binging your favorite series again. But in our case, we mean immersion, like spatial immersion. So on the lower part of the spectrum, you're immersed through your smartphone, screen, tablet, or laptop, or you're playing Pokemon Go in augmented reality. It could be that you're immersed in virtual space and still being able to see your reality, the space around you, which is defined as mixed reality. So on the highest part of the spectrum, you're immersed in virtual reality, visiting the Golden Gate Bridge through Google View VR. So once we define these two spectrums, we define then this diagram. And you see on the lower left in coral, it's the part that is not interactive, not immersive, meaning you are looking at visuals, but you are not doing anything. And if you are on the interactive space, but not immersive, so the purple quadrant, you are looking at visuals and you are doing things. And if you are in the fully immersive and fully interactive space, then you are in the gradient upper right quadrant, and you are in an immersive space and you are doing things. And these three categories is what I'm gonna place all of our work from the past 3 years into and explain how they fit. So
graphic computer. The device maps the room in order to construct a digital map of the space, allowing Penny to fill the room with holograms. What you see here is next-generation hand tracking. Penny moves the holograms throughout the room in real time and space. The boxes react using physics-based simulations, just like they would in the real physical world.
Sorry, Penny. This may be a bad time, but the client is on an earlier...
I hope you were able to hear that. So that's what you know about like virtual reality in its most interactive and immersive version. So this talk is divided in 3 parts, as I just said. The first part is low immersive, low interactive project, which fall in the category of artificial intelligence simulation. In part 2, we will dive further into interactivity with 2D games, and lastly, jump into the fully immersive and interactive with spatial web, which is also called metaverse. But let's start with a short intro of where we are today, or some of the theoretical precedent of this type of work. It goes without saying that interaction and immersion are inherent to the medium of games. We design interaction with game engines. An important artist's work in that field is Hito Steyerl. Her talk in 2016 in Barcelona called Why Games Can Art Professional Think, as a tribute to Haroon Farooqui is spectacular. She goes through the history of games, starting from the Turing test to Google CAPTCHA, Are You a Robot?, getting inspired from Farooqi's last work on video games and VR. So she argues that interactivity and immersion are the currencies of the future, monetizing your attention through your endless clicks, swipes, and scrolls. But to unpack the themes, let's first answer the question, why interaction and why today? Now, this is a bit technical, but I think it's important, so bear with me. This diagram is the diagram of spatial web, or what we call Web 3.0 stack. So to the left, you have the interface, which is how you interact with it, the logic, meaning its computation, and data, which is the information. So the internet started with the interface being the desktop. So you would install a program, and you would run it through LAN connection. The Web 1.0, the interface becomes the browser. You click, you type. Instead of programs, you have websites, and the data is stored in structured servers. In 2010, we have the introduction of the 2.0 web, which is suddenly on your mobile. You touch, you swipe, the computing is done by apps, and data is stored in the cloud. Lastly, in 2020, we entered Web 3.0, which is where we operate as Folly Feast Lab. The interface is wearables like AI, AR, and you show and tell. This is where narrative becomes key. The logic is artificial intelligence, and data is stored through distributed ledger technology, blockchain. So the 3.0 stack is what we call spatial web. It's also what you've heard being called the metaverse, but I like to stick with the spatial web definition of it. So let me simplify. If it is you and you're in a VR AR space using VR AR devices, what you're looking at is computed through AI and stored through the blockchain. But what you're actually experiencing is data privacy through distributed ledger technologies, smart responsive environments, and immersive experiences. To make that a bit clearer, I felt it might be too technical, so I translated it into architecture logic. So take this structure loosely, they're meant more as explanatory. So the interface, the logic, and the data in modernism, we are making building through plans, making laws and regulation. Think, for example, Le Corbusier. In 1980s, so in the 80s, with deconstructivism, we see the rise of importance in sketches, drawings, and models, the importance of section and volumes in terms of logic. Think OMA, Gary, and data is social and cultural. With parametricism, think Zaha Hadid, the interface becomes smarter with Grasshopper and BIM. The logic is performance and productivity. The data is materiality and statistics. And today, 2020 and forward, I am arguing that the interface is mixed reality and storytelling. The logic is through AI and behavioral trees and simulation, and the data is blockchain. So this is where all my project, I think, belong in the spatial web after 2020. So in that train of thought, it leads me to this question: how can games produce design research? Or to be more precise, how can developing interactive and immersive games with players' feedback loop produce design research? And to answer this, let's dive into the work. So we start again with low immersive, low interactive. Think the choral quadrant. While choreography is a workshop I taught at UCLA, it's part of the summer studio at Ideas, and it's based on Asian simulation and surface modeling. The project is the site is a notorious Beverly Hills six-way intersection at North Beverly Drive, North Cannon Drive, and Lomitas Ave. It's our wild choreography stage. We studied the speed and aerodynamism of various forms of urban transportation, from electric scooter, bikes, cars, and buses to delivery robots, as you can see on those 5 boards. We were able to assess our design through performance and go back and forth between design and testing. This workshop provocation is to shift our understanding of architecture from an organizational logic to one of movement. So we want to study through metrics and have a constant feedback loop of data. So we studied traffic movement to learn how to read patterns in vector flow. Students produced their version of these transportation vehicles and tested their velocity, as you can see with the fluid dynamic graph. We then wrote scripts to decide of their movement around and through this intersection in Beverly Hills, resulting in AI-driven simulation. So the designing at this stage is actually the design of the script, resulting in various narratives and world builds around this vehicle design. They're able to dodge and navigate through the transportation crowd. The goal is to have a smooth circulation of all modes of transportation. This way of thinking is transferable. Instead of transportation, we could think about people moving through an open space or through a building with multiple vertical circulation. Those where simulation played on the screen. The movement is designed through coding, and once you click and play it, it runs on its own, in real time, but it runs on its own. It's on a screen, which makes it very low on interactivity and immersion. Another project that follows similar logic, but is much more complex, since this is a technical seminar and spreads around over 3 months. Adapting to the next normal is a real-time quantifiable feedback tool. This seminar was developed as a technical support for a class I taught with Greg Lynn Studio when we taught together last year at UCLA Ideas. It centers on how we can occupy shared public space safely in our COVID-19 era. So we studied through simulation, the same tool that I just showed you before, and quantifiable feedback, 5 different building uses to adapt them to our life during the pandemic in terms of clean airflow and visitor flow. So we worked on a mixed-use building. This, contrary to the vehicle, is a building with multiple functions. The movement is designed through coding and runs with AI. It's a movement and behavior of people that we use to define the space. So in this project, we used a beta version of a new workflow in Unity called C#. It's still in beta version. It's going to be integrated soon. It's called goal-oriented action planning. scope, resulting in these sort of diagrams, indicating the possibilities of flows of people and action through time. So for example, if you look at the left one, that was a student trying to study the movement of a gym coach in a gym. So when the gym coach gets to work, what are the different actions they do? Do they go to the different machine, attend to client, take break, coach, and so on? This simulation will draw all the different pathway coaches will take to do these various tasks throughout the day, in whichever order they want. So if we change the position of machines, for example, the whole circulatory path network changes. Same as the previous project, even though intense on computing, once it is set up, it runs on its own. So we then extract feedback from all the data and we're able to modify it and design through the data sheet. Sorry, this is a preview of the work. These were plenty of fun, but I think maybe very low scoring on the immersive and interactive spectrum. So let's jump into our second category, which is low immersive but interactive experiences, which I think belong to the 2D game world. Again, on the spectrum, we are in the purple quadrant, lower right. So we are, remember, we're doing from a passive recipient to an active player. We're more interactive, so we are closer to the active player. My living room is public happened right at the turn of the pandemic. We started in March 2020. It's a twisted documentation of the spaces we inhabit. We were isolated in our domesticity and used that constraint as the starting point of the seminar, working our way from realism towards abstraction. So we generated 3D scans from our domestic environment as an as-built survey, and we worked backward to drawings and then design proposition by inputting them into an app. So it was inspired by photogrammetry, which is the result of taking multiple images from a space and reconfiguring it in a 3D point cloud. We were inspired by the work of Gerhard Richter overpainted photograph, which you see on the screen now, and his juxtaposition of oil paint brush with abstraction, which on highly real imagery. And this juxtaposition of abstraction and hyper real is what we wanted to reproduce digitally. So we took the traditional process of making architecture from model kits to 3D modeling to cutting and making 2D to drawing plan, rendering, and finally building it. And we did all of that, but in reverse. So we started from the built environment. And from that built environment, we produced cinemagraph, then went and did rendering, then unfolded these 3D into plans and section, resulting in those cinemagraphs of student spaces. Some of them merged their 3 living rooms into one, producing a fictive space where they were digitally together. The photogrammetry stays true to the lighting, resolution, and the quality of the spaces being scanned. This is another group that worked on Entourage, emptying architecture from all the mobile furniture and stuff. And again, 4 of them designing one space where they could potentially digitally be together. We then used these parts and developed a game where you could design through that kit of parts a new fictive living room with your colleague. So we used animation, and what you can see on the bottom of each of these 4 screens are buttons to generate new part, rotate and arrange, and even change the point of view of the camera. So it is interactive since you're able to do all of that and to design the space in real time. I was lucky to be invited to run this workshop again as part of the international platform Digital Futures. And you can see this looks very different. That's maybe a few, I want to say like 6-7 months later, where we were actually allowed to be in person again. It's really funny to see that this version of the workshop actually has people scanned in them. In the same room, we also have, it was summer, so we have the addition of plants, and this type of work scored for me very low on immersion, since we're still playing through a screen, but very high on interaction because you're able to do anything you want and design the space. As you can see, I'm moving my mouse and designing all of these different spaces. Something more recent, this is actually from 2 months ago, at the end of 2021. This is a design studio at UCLA. We are looking at different residential types in LA. Fabric include courtyard houses, townhouses, our two-zone collective, Venice Canal, Venice Los Angeles Canal, Venice Walk Street, urban core apartment, lofts, towers, and of course, we have something called the Los Angeles Dingbat. It's a type of housing in LA. The outcome of this work is an operation manual app that serves as a collective intellectual repository, quantifying a taxonomy of LA type to draw from and deploy in further conjecture. So that was an app we developed that basically students could choose whichever type they wanted from the left, and they could position them on the site that's in Culver City, actually next to Eric Owen Moss building. And they're able to like position them on the site, move them around. And there's the first two you see are attract and repel. So there's an attractor and repeller, and that's able to move the geometry around. You can output an image, you can export the OBJ, and you can change the camera angle. This game was used to as a design research, as a first part, the start of the studio work. And these are a few examples of the student work. This is grad students, second year, and this is the type of 3 student result from that studio. And that's the first work I show. That's actually a Folly Feast Lab work, not the result of teaching. So this is a Folly Feast Lab project. It's very different in nature. As you know, Beirut, to Vivian and I, is our hometown, and we're both Lebanese. And as you all know very well, sadly, in August 4th, 2020, the city was shaken by an enormous blast, and this destroyed its economy and was the motivation behind this awareness project. So we haven't been able to travel to Beirut since then for various reasons. So we, in collaboration with Lena Pozniakova and Masha Elakovic, we actually did a virtual exhibition in Studio 106 in LA, actually in Santa Monica Airport. It was part of the exhibition also later at A+D Museum. It was part of Wedge Gallery, Digital Saloon podcast. And we created this project because we wanted to create an awareness and link to a donation page to what has been happening in Beirut. So hashtag Talk About Beirut is an awareness project displayed as an online exhibition. It's a story is told about Beirut, Lebanon, through the lens of several artists from Lebanon, US, Germany, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland. You can see in green, in the green quarter, you have the name of all the participants, and I will get in it a bit more. Beirut, as we all know, is a beautiful city, and it's been going a series of traumatic events and currently faces a devastating outcome of these recent happenings. With this project, we raised awareness, but also contributed to the cause by the means of donation. It featured a before and after page, where one documentation was from before the explosion and one from after. I will show just a few of the artists that collaborated. This is Bana Hafar. She collaborated with music and pictures that she's taken of Beirut a few years ago. Another great collaborator that you all know is Gilbert Haj. He donated like one of his images and a text that he took from Jalal Toufi on Toufikian ruins. Another is also a graduate from Alba, Andre Zahia, and he gave us some images of his recent game where turtles fly. And one of my favorite projects is Tara Sahi. She graduated, she was in my class actually at Alba, and she contributed with these 3 images that she has taken from Beirut, and she called them Strange Sky. Our contribution is we generated, actually Vivian's sister was in Beirut and she took videos of Maram Khayel, and we generated these 3D scans of the buildings after they were ravaged by the explosion. This is a month after the 4th of August. So I can share later my website link. If you go to my website or Folly Feast Lab website, you'll have access to the exhibition page, and you'll see how you can interact with all of these different artists and contributions. So this work belongs in low immersive, but highly interactive, because you're able to move around these spaces, and these are actually also available in VR. So most of our work at Folly Feast Lab, other than the one I just showed, hashtag Talk About Beirut, is part of the immersive and interactive high end of the spectrums. So to put it back into context, we're in the immersive interactive, so in that gradient upper right quadrant. And just to remind ourselves a bit, we're working on that second half, closer to virtual reality, networking, and mixed reality. Virtual Herbaria is a workshop. It's actually a summer studio I gave at UCLA. It questions the way we visualize and utilize large data sets, archives, and libraries. With today's technologies, we have access to an infinite amount of online data and years of archives and knowledge at our fingertips. Algorithms that can sort, search through, and identify hierarchy in that data are becoming extremely valuable because they're able to tell apart correct information from construct. In the last few years, we've seen the backlash of manipulated content and the potency of fictitious representation. So we are calling representation, reality, and artifice into question. With the catastrophic repercussion of crypto market on our environment, we will address climate change and the Anthropocene and put our preconceived understanding of nature and technology under scrutiny. Our site is the online herbarium of the Southern Californian Desert, the Mojave Desert near Joshua Tree National Park. Virtual Herbaria aims at reviving the Californian Desert Herbarium archive into an immersive experience through spatializing that data. We started from 10 herbarium samples and designed new fictitious version of them. So we used Unity Game Engine to design Virtual Herbaria as an interactive spatial archive where real and fictitious content flourishes. We augmented them as you can see, the exhibition wall on the right and one closer specimen underneath it. We then designed virtual Herbaria, where you could access the app in VR and screen, so on the web too, and you can walk, explore, and plant new specimens to design your individualized landscape. These are some of the results. As with previous work, students created a whole world around their designed cacti, some world building to get even further than others. I was happy to run this workshop again in a 10 days workshop for the B Pro at the Bartlett. Same outline as you can see, but the possible outcome that the results were very different, ranging from even more extreme on the word building side. I guess in London they are less familiar with Joshua Tree and the Californian desert, so they created underwater scenes and other fictitious worlds. This brings me to Spatial Fabulation. It's an exhibition we did in Frankfurt when I was teaching at the Städelschule architecture class. It's a VR exhibition which led to a publication I was invited to co-edit on VR that came out December of last year. These were thesis students and we worked on only in VR. So here you can see a student carving in VR using architectural artifact of these three designers. Other work involved interactivity, designing games, using photogrammetry to represent and tell the story of a city. It led to a publication we worked on for more than a year and was pushed because of COVID. It finally got published last year in late 2021. This book is divided in half. The first half are written contribution by VR artist and theoretician, and the second half is a portfolio of VR work, ranging from various VR applications. So you can find this book online. Amongst the other contributors, there's Rachel Russin, Sanford Quinter, Daniel Binbaum, Marshmallow Laserfeast, Jacoby, Stater White, S. Pop, Paisley Smith, and more. After this thesis studio in Frankfurt, I taught another graduate thesis studio at UCLA, centered on the city of Los Angeles and understanding its urban identities. Today, there's an urgency to address our city's cultural messiness, messy in the best way. This research studio explores Los Angeles' lush diversity by uncovering its multiple layers of resolution. We speculate through interactive storytelling on the near future of cultural spaces. Architecture thrives through multiple mediums. In this specific research studio, we were interested in architecture as a visual apparatus, So we were basically concerned with representation. Hashtag Chinatown at Home is a speculation on the technologies behind photogrammetry. It explores frictions between texture and volume. Chinatown is a recognizable architectural style that has been copied in every major city. She explores the idea of following through the use of mapping technologies and convolutional neural networks, wrapping our exterior and interior domesticities, resulting in designing a platform that will convert any space into your own hashtag Chinatown at home. We worked with machine aesthetics, photogrammetry, and cinematography technique. She even did a YouTube review of her own game. You can see her in the upper part of the screen. Other projects looked at the culture of diversity at UCLA on campus and proposed different cultural pavilions, or on the Sunset Boulevard with a work looking at fashion and using Zoom interface. This was like around March 2020. So using Zoom interface to communicate the work. Other imagining what would the city look like if it were to be designed by an artificial intelligence robot. These speculations result in interactive platforms and games using design research and being centered on aesthetic and urban design. Leaky LA is maybe the oldest project here. It dates to 2018, in the early days of using machine learning and image style transfer technique for 3D VR spaces. It's a speculative streetscape design exploring the future of AI-generated aesthetics on the facades of downtown Los Angeles Arts District using AI style transfer on extravagant Rococo fabric. These strangely beautiful environments are visualized through personalized VR apps. This corner is designed with machine and human vision, exists as an immersive space. Different type of representations overlap. There are point cloud, 3D scan meshes, 2D spherical photograph, and real footage. The aesthetic bleeds onto the sidewalk, making it part of the building, and the result is an instance of leaking between the digital and the physical world. Finally, we get to the project before last. In 2019, we were asked to join LA Forum to be part of the 5 Architects Vision of LA in 2020. The exhibition was planned before the pandemic, so we had no idea what was about to happen. So once the pandemic hit, we had to adapt to the situation and turned our VR experience proposal into a drive-in exhibition. A bit like you would drive into a fast food place, maybe inspired by the United States culture, food culture. So once inside the pandemic, the exhibition got titled Everything Changes 2020 because, well, everything did. We actually worked with a writer and we reacted to her writing. In orange, you can see a bit of her, of the text that she gave us. So in this project, I will go a bit more into the steps of where we got, how we got to where we got. We worked with Terry Wolverton. She's the writer who wrote a text about her experience of coming to LA back maybe 30, 40 years ago, when being a lesbian was not acceptable anywhere outside of LA and San Francisco. And you can see here also the different artists, architects, sound artists, editors, poets, journalists that were part of the same exhibition. So for our work in reaction to Terry's text, we look at 20 residential neighborhoods in LA, and we wanted to tease out the particularities of their domestic front porches. This is the map of all the different places. These houses were 3D scanned from Venice to Culver City to Echo Park, Silver Lake, downtown, Hollywood, Santa Monica, Koreatown, and other parts. We processed the photogrammetry of all of these houses and arrange them so they become seamlessly integrated with one urban scape, and we call that our streetscape. This is what they looked like before we did anything to them. So this is just processing the 3D into a 3D, the images into a 3D point cloud. The focus of the story is on a fictitious driver we call Amal. It's a woman who is on a journey driving through LA's neighborhood in search of her own queer community. Stereotypical symbols of queer culture and their manifestation on the house's front porches. That was an early sketch of how we imagined the space would be. Each 3D scan house would be populated by objects belonging to different subculture of queer culture. This is what they look like after production. So this is once we did our little magic on them and a lot of weeks of work. The cut you see at the 2/3 of the screen is when we switch wall. So this is actually projected on 2 walls. So yeah, what you see at the 2/3 is when we switch wall. So it's perfectly mapped onto the space. The story is told through the point of view, which is aligned perfectly in the space with a car passenger side window and front window. So this is what the space looked like. On the left, you can see all the instruction, where to put the projector, where the projection mapping would be on the 2 walls, how the car would enter, and what is the height of the car window in regards to the wall. So because of all the institutions were closed because of the pandemic, then we had to use a private residential garage in Silver Lake. This is what you see on the right, where people could drive in and out while experiencing the projective immersive wall out of their driver front and side window. So this is the projective immersive space. It allows visitors to maintain social distancing guidelines by remaining in their cars and watching from inside. The drive-in portrays a filmic diary of sorts, viewing through the visitor's own car window as if they were themselves driving through the reconstructed queer neighborhood. And this influenced the way we developed our immersive wall version, which would have been different with a headset. This is the setup during the exhibition, and this is the view from the visitor's point. The projection extending to the full size of the windshield and side window. Visitors would park and enjoy the full 8-minute video, and they can, of course, join in or leave at any point because it's an endless, seamless looped video. And here is a teaser. Red house was actually the house right behind the drive-in garage. So I was saying, sorry, that red house was the house that was right behind the parking garage. So when people would wait to drive in for a car to drive out so they can drive in, they would look at this house and then they would see it digitally in the projected wall, like in the immersive experience. After belonging, I want to show the last project that I'll show today. As you can see, Mediterranean Sea Diary is a project that started in 2019. It's still in development and will still be for the 2 coming years. I'm showing you what it looked like in 2020. In this project, our research is centered around the Mediterranean coastline and e-waste economy, so what we call the afterlife of overproduction. It's an interactive AI-generated VR forum about sustainable technologies and their build to dump syndrome. We were honored to be part of Fiber Festival, where we presented the version that I'm going to present to you today. Mediterranean Sea Diary is a project that imagines a future of post-human spaces like landfills and e-waste lands as a result of overproduction. These spaces are generated as a cautionary tale of the Mediterranean coast near future and are based on recent events around the politics of waste management, leading Lebanon to dump its waste into the Mediterranean Sea. It all started with us looking at our phones, VR headsets, tablets, PC, laptops, smartwatches, and wondering what happens to them when they turned out to be designed for the dump. So they were actually made to be thrown away after a few years and almost never recycled. And we looked at the lives of people living in these e-waste dumps, and as with anywhere where humans inhabit, they design their shelters, define their work. And we looked back at Lebanon and our trash crisis and how they would deal with the new coming crisis. So this is a women group a woman walking near a pile of trash that has been inhabiting the city since the cleaning company closed its doors. And we looked at the beautiful views from the Mediterranean coastline, but now filled with trash bags these are all actual images and they're not manipulated or edited. And it comes down to us, like this is the research part we did where our interest came from. And it comes down to us working on this provocation. What is the afterlife of overproduction? Through the eyes of surveillance drone, we watch a fictitious player, an avatar we also called Amal, and her trained dog roam around garbage. We work through the same medium as I already described. This world is generated by artificial intelligence and inhabited by simulated people and pets that wander through the terrain looking for rare materials to scavenge. It's a network VR space where people can come to discuss and wander around and find rare materials, build shelter, dive underwater. It's basically a virtual world, part of the metaverse. The narrative of that VR networking world is a queer narrative as defined by Shira Chess in the queer case of video games in 2016, where she argues that each avatar has its own story in the same space as others, and all of these stories could be completely different and don't need to be a linear, and don't need to go into a linear narrative path. It's an interactive experience where the environment will react to your touch, movement, and it's a collective experience where you're not alone in VR. The topics discussed in this space are set by the UN Goals for Sustainable Futures. There are lectures held in the space. You can gain expertise when you learn and use the tools you learn in the VR space. It's a multiplayer VR educational game in an open world environment based on the Mediterranean Lebanese coastline projected e-waste future. So come and join us. And with this, it's time to wrap up. So the question was, how can developing interactive and immersive games with player feedback loop produce design research? In the thesis we're working on, in my teaching and in our studio at Folly Feast Lab, we work in that last quadrant, the spatial web, using VR and AR devices, computing through AI, and storing through the blockchain. Thank you so much for having me. And please do stay up to date with our work, follyfeastlab.com, YARA.FEGHALI.com.
Thank you, Yara, for the illustrious conference. So we're going to pass on to the Q&A. We're going to give time for the audience to formulate questions, if there's any. But first, I'm just going to start by asking you something. So you presented an extensive palette of tools and digital mediums that have allowed you to approach the interactive scenario. Would you be able to elaborate a strategy that you yourself might have used as you were starting out with such tools as to tackle the repertoire, and that could help out some auditors that would casually like to try this out, but have no idea where to begin, basically?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I think, maybe this interest started once I started using game engines, so like Unity game engine. But I always wondered, we produce as architects images, renderings of these spaces, but we never get to do anything in them, right? They're just like these images on the wall and you're like, this is my project. But I wonder, what if the design process is something that doesn't end there, but it's something that is in like infinite interaction with you. So you would build those spaces and you would be able to change these colors, or even in educational setting, you would be able to go with, your instructor or your collaborators, and you'll be able to say, what if we try this wall in that color? What if we try this there? And you're able to design in real time. And that's what really struck to me as, okay, I want to do this. How do I do it? So I started looking into interactive tools, and this is what led me to game engines and looking at the world of gaming. And it's of course not like me on my own that turned to that, but a lot of architecture school, the same way that I think 30 years ago, architects started to incorporate through, the work of Greg Lynn. We started to use Maya, which are tools from the animation industry, right? From the film industry here in Hollywood. We started to take these tools and use them in architecture. And I think today it's a bit the same that is happening. Like the movie industry is taking tools from the game industry. And I think architects are also, we're starting in a lot of schools to see that we are using tools from the game industry too, because they're the most up-to-date and the most immersive and interactive that they can be. So I would say maybe start to build like Pac-Man or a small game with Unity, and I can tell you, you will get hooked.
Awesome. So a second question, and that's just coming right off from the conference. So basically, I noticed you introduced some sort of a diagram, a quadrant, and that had basically 4 poles. So leading from immersive to non-immersive, interactive to non-interactive, right? And from what I noticed is that basically all of the projects that were being tackled were either a gradient between 2 poles or something that is very punctual. Would there be a possibility to convey a project or design a project that would be able to manifest the 4 poles at the same time, through some sort of an ambivalence, within the same expo? And if there's a possibility, how could we aboard such project?
Great question. I love that. I think that it's possible through the medium, right? So there's something we call medium specificity, meaning depending on which tool you work with, there's a certain outcome, right? So when you look at the work of an architecture office, let's say, you can know, oh, they're using Grasshopper, right? Or they're using BIM, Revit, and so on. So you're able to tell by the result which kind of tools were used. So in case you want a different result on that 4-quadrant diagram, then it depends on the tool that you use. So it could be the same project when you show it on a screen, right? It's not immersive, but if you can interact with it, then it's interactive. If it's on the screen and it's like a trailer, then it's not immersive, not interactive. So I think it depends on the tool. It could be the same content and it could be the same interest, and then you just show it through different tools so that the result would be somewhere else on the spectrum, somewhere else in that diagram.
All right. Okay. Thank you for answering. Any questions from the audience? Any questions online? I think we're all just, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Oliver. I want to ask you, do you think with photogrammetry and AI and all those coming technologies about analyzing the environments and putting the data into 3D versus like taking actual dimensions or going on site and or 3D modeling on our own, like we're used to, like using Rhino 3D modeling the details? Do you think that someday this other technologies would overcome 3D modeling, and you would have wasted maybe a lot of time in your life designing and taking dimensions or something, and then suddenly photogrammetry and AI take over? Or is there like more of an advantage between one over another, or some advantages in 3D modeling design will always stay? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, for the question. I don't think that one will take over. I don't think something will take over the other. They live in different worlds. So it's a bit like, when we started to have TV and series and video content, people were starting to say, oh, nobody's going to go to the theater or nobody's going to read a book. But it's not true, right? Like there never been any, like I think 2021 was the year of the most published books ever. So I think they live just in different realms. I think Rhino is a tool we took from the ship industry. So the problem with Rhino that I see is that you're always designing from the outside. You're never designing from the inside. But if you use Rhino to design something and you take the measurement and everything, everybody who has built a building can tell you that the result is going to be very different. And this is why when you build the building and you take the survey of the space as it looks like once it's built, tools like photogrammetry would make that way quicker, right? And these technology as they are today, they still need a lot of time to become better for their performance and their time consumption to go down and their performance to become better. So I don't think that I don't think one will take over the other. I think they're just two different steps in the same process. So you could be a 3D modeling with Rhino, and you can use that skill to model like we do, right? We use the skills of 3D modeling to build metaverse worlds in the metaverse, or to build digital realms or VR experiences. And we also use photogrammetry, but for a totally different reason. Like we want the realistic textures, we want the effects of that 3D point cloud, but we are not looking for precision in using 3D scanning. So I think they're basically two different realms. I wouldn't be afraid that AI will take over. AI will take over the things you don't want to do, like how do you say that? Like how to tile a bathroom or something. That I think nobody wants to do. So maybe AI can take over that, but it's never going to take over designing buildings or anything that we do as architects.
Anyone else? Good. I had one more question. Sorry, I'm off camera. Do you ever work with data sets within your work?
Yeah, all of it.
So what would be the number one advice in terms of accumulating a data set when you've pinpointed your thematic and you want to go about it? Like, is it just about quantity, or is there the quality factor that comes along with the accumulation?
Yeah, great question. It depends what you're using that data set for. So if you're training like a machine, if you're into machine learning and you want to train an AI to recognize a certain pattern, then your data sets will be oriented towards that goal, right? So I didn't show that work, but in one of our work, we looked into identifying architectural facades of buildings, and we trained our AI to identify architecture windows, basically. So the way we build that data set, because it's for AI, it needs to be enormous, but it also needs to have every type of window ever, from every different angle, in every light, in every setting. And you can imagine how much that is, right? If you think about all the windows you saw in your life and all the different angles you saw the same window at, it's like a huge database. So that would be quantity. And I wouldn't say quality, I would say content oriented. So it needs to be a window. So that's like how we use like one data set for that specific project where we trained an AI to read windows. If you're using data sets for something else, like the first type of project I show, the cars around the intersection or the people like ants moving in the buildings, this is a huge data set that basically analyzes the pattern of movement, like of people moving in buildings. A lot of company use this, like Greg Lynn, I did this with Greg, so he uses that for advanced, like defining spatial motion. So you would design a building through the motion of these people in the space. And there's so much research around that. Like there's a company that uses a headset where they can see how your brain waves define before you know it, which side you're gonna go. Like if you take a left turn or a right turn in a space. So I would say it depends what you want to do. I think the most important thing in everything we do is always to be clear about our goal and to define what is it exactly we're trying to do. And then we find the techniques and the tools that fit within what we want to do.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I guess that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the amazing
Thank you so
conference.
much.
And we're always happy to have you back here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I can see the new auditorium. I hope you all have a wonderful
Yeah.
night. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day. Thank you, Yara.
Thank you. Bye-bye.